Welcome to Safety Justice League.
The next time I have to come in here, I'm cracking skulls.
Beef jerky out, his black coffee in his hand, and he is interviewing a nobody.
Oh my gosh. Don't.
We're sending you back to the future.
NSFW.
I'm your number one fan.
Get my mental druthers ready here.
You need to do that red leather, yellow leather.
What is that, like a tongue exercise?
Unique New York. Unique New York.
There you go.
Watermelon,
Any monkey business is ill-advised.
All right, let's get this started. Mute your people.
Mute.
Okay, now I'm gonna want to swear. I won't swear.
We're on a mission from God.
One question though, can Redbeard's beard actually do some superpower stuff? I mean, that thing is getting big.
You can't handle the truth.
How's it going, everybody? On today's episode of Safety Justice League presents, Abby Ferri teams up with the superheroes of safety training. If you don't know who they are, well, stick around, you're about to find out. They get into what it means to be ruthless. You're not going to want to miss it.
Hey, it's Abby Ferri with another Safety Justice League Presents, and this time I'm joined by 3 people, and I'm super stoked because it's 3 people that I very much look up to and admire and love to count amongst my safety network. And I was able to do a really fun session with them last year at Safety 2019, which is the reason behind this podcast. So the superheroes of safety training are with me, and I'm going to have each of them give an introduction and kind of a short origin story of how they came to be and came to know their training superpower. So I'm just looking at my board here. So if Linda, if you want to go first, and then Tim, and then Regina, does that sound good?
Sure.
Awesome.
I can give it a shot. This is Linda Tapp. My company is Safety Fundamentals, and how I got to be a superhero of safety training with the specialty of gamification is when I was asked to do a safety training class that was 3 days long to a bunch of pretty rough chemical workers. I was looking for ways to really keep their interest over a couple days. So I started experimenting with using interactive activities and games and gamification. And when it was super successful, I started using it every single time I did safety training. So that's how I ended up in my role of superhero gamification person.
Awesome. Tim, how about you?
Hey, Abby. Thanks for having me on. This is kind of a short story, but I won't make it that long. Quasi-funny. Storytelling is the way I go, and I have my own business, Total Safety Compliance, do some compliance work, but a majority of what I do is actually training, and how I got started as a consultant was through training. I ended up leaving Motorola because of a lot of construction companies asking me to do training. Had a little lull there between 1999 and 2005, and we worked for a company together, not together, but we worked for the same actual organization as independents, and then moved on from there. I got a job with SafeStart. Well, SafeStart, the job is a Canadian company, so I still work as an independent consultant. But a majority of what I do there is through storytelling. And the way the superheroes of safety training came about was that you and I were doing a session in San Antonio, 2018, and thought that was prudent that we could probably step our game up and see if Linda and Regina would want to join us. And I think from there, you kind of let it grow organically. We ended up getting personalities. I think you actually handed me almost a face shield with eye holes in it, and it was the Incredible Hulk, probably for the size of my shoulders. But we took on these personas, and the majority of the work that I do for my superhero power is storytelling. I have a podcast now myself for storytelling and safety, which just got started, but I really enjoy it, and I'm having a lot of fun. Even in this downtime with coronavirus, I've been keeping myself busy with recording and doing interviews and lots of webinars and lots of safety training online. So it's been okay. I've been keeping busy, but could be busier. And as you know, we spend a lot of time traveling, but thanks for having me on, and looking forward to seeing what we're going to do here.
Awesome. Yeah, sorry about those masks. If you guys remember, I think they were child size. Maybe I can do better next time.
It's fun.
Yeah, got to keep it fun. Regina, how about you?
Well, Regina McMichael, I am the safety training ninja, and I don't know if I have a superpower per se. I don't think it's any ninja skills in the more traditional sense of the word, but I just yeah, I've kind of dedicated my career to training, design, development, and delivery, and have really tried to spread the word to the industry that we need to get training to be awesome and amazing in order to actually make some real change in behaviors. Otherwise, it's just the bad rep that safety training's always had. It'll just proliferate. So, kind of hoping maybe my superpower is some sort of change in the way we view things. How about that?
I like it. Yeah, usually safety training doesn't really inspire people to, I guess, one, even show up, and two, like stay awake or show signs of life while they're there. And I think all four of us have probably had those really horrible experiences that we've lived to tell the tale. And maybe that's kind of what the superhero persona kind of grew out of, or our superhero specialty grew out of. So Tim alluded to it, that right now with coronavirus, that it's changing a lot of the ways that we usually would do things. And I think that the four of us, we usually are a little bit more creative than the average trainer. And so I wanted to get you all together because, I mean, one, it's just like, it's an awesome group to learn from. So I'm hoping that we can get a lot of good information out there for people to take and use at their organizations right now. But what I wanted to focus on for this conversation is what are some tips that we can provide for people, because there's a lot of safety people that are attached and employed by these essential or critical infrastructure organizations, and they're performing essential work, and or at least they're supporting those that are doing this essential work. And so work hasn't stopped for a lot of our safety professional counterparts. But like we were talking to before we started recording, that we're working, or there are people in our networks, they're working kind of like with their hands tied behind their backs, or Regina, you said with their wings clipped, or like some other limitation that basically anyone that had like a go-to method of training, especially if it was in person, you just can't do it. So what kind of tips do you guys have to share for people as they're approaching all these limitations for the ways that they would usually conduct training?
Well, I don't know if I should start, but I was just thinking about Dumpling Dan Snyder. Dr. Snyder was asked to be our moderator last year. And from a tip perspective, this is just one that I've seen. I've seen a lot of safety professionals in training talk a lot. And I'm not saying Dr. Dan talks a lot, but I remember specifically looking over at Regina. She goes, "You want me to ninja him?" And I'm like, I think it might work out in this case. So yes, Regina, you have a superhero power. You are a ninja. And our moderator, Dan, I love him to death. I just saw him in Pittsburgh, but safety professionals have a tendency to want to maybe talk overboard or talk too much and let the class do its work. Lockout tagout can be done with the lockouts and the tagouts, and you could do a lot of that work with hands-on. So that's an individual tip. I don't know if anybody else has anything else.
I'd like to build on that part super quick, actually. I think that a lot of safety training is something I've had to learn, is to be okay with silence, and that sometimes silence isn't horrible. It might just be that the workers are processing something.
Mm-hmm. I get that. I get that a lot.
I think to jump on that, one of the concepts that I've seen with a lot of folks that I've worked with over the years is they live in that, under that position of fear that they have to do everything. If they have to tell them everything, they have to cover everything, they have to, do these complex 8 hours or whatever, the particular example might be at that time. But we don't have the luxury of that right now. A lot of folks are having to go to online training. Just for reference, Z490.2, which is the e-learning component of the ANSI standard for safety training and safety learning, that's just come out. And so that's a helpful tip. You can get that through ANSI or ASSP. But a lot of folks are like, how do we how do we do that? And I'm like, well, you can't just flip a switch and do it tomorrow. But at a minimum, we need to take advantage of the clarity that we're being forced to see right now, that what do you really need to train people on, what you really need to teach them on. If you've got a finite amount of time, everyone's standing 6 feet apart and they're not in a classroom anymore, suddenly they're standing up and you now have 20 minutes instead of 4 hours. That has to be the best 20 minutes ever. And it means that you've really got to be amazing at defining what your content is and what the people really need to know. In the past, it wasn't a luxury for perhaps the recipients, but in many cases, the safety person could get up there and droll on and on and on for as long as we so desired. And that just isn't the case. It hasn't been in the best of working environments in a while, but right now with coronavirus, with COVID-19, it's just everything is so hyper critical. You've got to get the information just right. You've got to get it out just right. You've got to keep people apart. You've got to, reach people at home or reach people in remote locations. And so the whole world's kind of flipped in that arena. And so now is the time to really get wise on what the content is and what you really need to share to protect your workers.
And Abby, I'll jump on what Regina said. It's along the same lines. We talk a lot about microlearning, in normal times, and now's the perfect opportunity to really look at what that is. It's not just doing it in 5 minutes. It's what Regina said, chopping out all the unnecessary junk that you don't have to throw in there. And really just focusing our attention on the key parts that are going to make a real difference. So, if we look at the bright side of the whole situation that we're in, people will probably come out better trainers in the end, right? Because we have to. You have to focus yourself and really do the best you can with very limited resources. We also talked about having people not in the same room anymore, and that's something brand new for a lot of people. There's really quick and easy ways to send out bits of training, by text or by email, just however you can do it. But it's going to have a lot of people be forced to learn some new skills. And if you have extra time on your hands now, it's a great time to try to figure those things out. I know a lot of people have been on Zoom meetings for the first time ever. And it's a whole new world when you have to present to people and talk to people through Zoom when you're used to doing all the face-to-face stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, no pressure, right? Like you have to boil down 4 hours of training into the best 20 minutes ever. That scares me.
And you have to master the technology right on top of it.
Right.
You have to learn Zoom and all those facets as well.
Yeah, it's hard for me to trim out some of the content. I get attached, I think, to some of my, especially if it's a training module or something that I developed. It's like, oh, but I really like that slide, or I really liked that activity. And sometimes you just have to cut out, like be ruthless about what you cut out in order to leave just the very essential things they need to know.
Superheroes being ruthless. It's crazy to think about what to cut out. I mean, your best bits is what makes you feel good about the training. And you usually get the best feedback from students when it's live, but when you're looking for that feedback too, when it's online, I feel like there's a kind of a disconnect there too. But if you cut out your best bits, then you're not even sure if they're going to be getting what you need. And that's got to be tough, and you got to be ruthless. And I would agree.
Well, and I think one of the things that we can do is, as we're introducing our ruthless module of 20 minutes instead of 4 hours or whatever, straight up tell people, I know your time is super important, more important than it ever was before. And I know that it's more challenging than ever before. So how I'm going to show you that I respect that is by carving this information down to the absolute bare minimum. And in exchange for that, I ask that you give me 100% of those 20 minutes, whereas you might not have given me 100% of those 4 hours. And so, developing a social contract or our commitment between the learner and the instructor, so that everybody knows what the score really is. It's not like, oh, we made it shorter because it was always too long anyway. No, we're making it shorter because we get that this is a significantly more challenging world than it was 3 months ago. And so by creating that kind of social contract and saying, does everyone agree, does everyone go for this, I find that by people kind of saying, yes, I'll play along for 20 minutes or whatever, it tends to get them to bite a little bit harder on the content, because they're being brought in as a participant and not just being talked at.
I really like that. I'm going to use that even after all this blows over.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's been really tough for me. I had just a recent job in southern Chicago, Kankakee, and they're busy right now because they're working on plasma and they're also working on part of the vaccination. So they've got tons of noble work that they're doing, but 90% of their compliance training was being performed online before coronavirus. And one of the biggest disconnects they had was, do you go ahead and try to break this down even when I delivered the report during the coronavirus epidemic? And at the time it was an epidemic and then it moved to pandemic. And I'm now thinking, are they going to be able to even move away from online training? Because a lot of their, like lockout tagout earlier was one of those recommendations to do hands-on training, and they weren't doing it. So now it's like, do I got to go back and tell them just what I told them that I didn't want them to know from an online perspective? now I've got to reboot, and I got to be ruthless. That's probably going to be the hashtag from this podcast.
Yeah,
Hashtag
think
ruthless
so.
superhero.
I like it. Yeah,
I do
because
too.
superheroes, it makes it sound so like squeaky clean and nice and yay, we're saving the day. But it's like, no, we're going to be ruthless.
Yeah, that's right. We're the Suicide Squad. We're going to do something good, but we're going to be bad at the same time.
I love it.
Well, I wanted to jump on the comment that Linda made about micro learning, which is one of my all-time favorites, and I do not think it is being leveraged well enough by the safety industry. I truly do think that the silver lining of all of this is that the industry professionals, companies, corporations, whatever, can develop a greater sense of resilience going forward. But one of my current little favorite go-tos is a free software, 100% online. Don't need IT's approval to download it, and they've upped their game on the freebie side. I actually pay for my portion of the service because I want kind of all the extra bells and whistles. But they have a free offering, and that's called Powtoon, Powtoon, and they've kind of upped their game on what's available for free now, just during the virus, so that they can provide even better stuff. But what I love about it is it creates a whole bunch of vignettes and stories and animations, but it allows us to perhaps have a little fun with serious topics. I know what we do is important. I know that it's about saving lives. I know that it can't always be a joke, but sometimes we can lighten the mood, and I found that clients that I have been using it with, because it's animated, because it's a little bit silly, it lightens it up a little bit when you're talking about serious stuff. But it also is really great for kind of PSA kind of stuff. Hey, I just need to throw out a little public service. Here's the latest info on this or this, and Powtoon's a great option. There's a bunch of other companies out there as well. But I think by acknowledging that a 5-minute micro learning on one very particular topic might be the best way to send information out to people right now. And Linda brought up, text messages or emails. That's still learning. It can be a tweet if that's the connection that you have with your workforce. It can be an Instagram post. It can be an internal program through the Hoover app. If you use that, there's different options out there. But the concept of what learning is finally going to be seen as the much bigger universe that it really is. That it could be a text, that it's a 5-minute conversation, that it's a little movie that you make, a little cartoon that you make. The concept of it's 8 hours of classroom training. That's antiquated thinking. And so this is a great opportunity to introduce these other options into the arsenal of the safety professional so that we can use them after all of this.
I'm going to have to tell people that they have to have like a notebook when they listen to this, because you just dropped like a few things and I'm like, what was that? Who?
Tell me what to repeat. I'd be happy to do it.
Well, I might just have to get a list from you after and just write it all down.
But Powtoon is my fave, and it's funny as heck, and the little things are animated, and I've used it for clients, and the clients just howl. They think it's a riot. They think it's so much fun. And you can't use it for lockout tagout. It's not going to lend itself to that. But if you wanted to, pass a word about a change in policy or procedure, or just a friendly reminder about the 6-foot distance, or that they're putting in infrared thermometers at the doorway starting tomorrow, and you just want to get that info out, it's a great way to do that by adding a little bit of fun. And honestly, once you play with it a little bit, it's pretty intuitive.
this conversation that we're having right now is unbelievably crazy. So there's a lot to be said about networking, but I personally want to learn something new every day. And just this little 20-minute conversation so far, I've already learned so much. So in a 20-minute time span, maybe even the 5 minutes before we even clicked on, there's just so much out there. And if you're willing to learn, that's the tough part, is motivating people to be willing to learn. There's so much to learn. And Regina, I just grabbed like 17,000 nuggets from you in just the last 2 minutes.
I don't even know that I said that much, but thank you.
There's so much to be said. Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, I hope it was all true.
Yeah.
People are Googling Powtoon going, there's no such thing. Yeah, there is.
I wanted to ask Linda something, because I think that
sure.
like the activities that you bring to the table, that I'm always giving out your resources or telling people to look at your website when they're looking for like true gamification and like hands-on, or not even hands-on, but just different types of activities that they can do in the learning environment. Do you have any technology or apps, or just maybe different ways that people could administer or facilitate activities for the workers to do training?
That's kind of tough. The ones that you're probably thinking of all rely on people sitting in a classroom together, which I would suggest almost all of those for people. Some of them do lend themselves to being added to an e-learning program, but Regina mentioned earlier that's not going to happen overnight, especially if no one's ever used e-learning before. So I would just try, if you do have the online classes, to add, some of those interactive activities, with the side chat rooms, you can do things like that. And some of the drag and drops could probably lend itself to some of the activities I have that are based on putting things in correct sequences and sorting things like that. So there's some modifications you can make, but a lot of the things are very team oriented, with people sitting together at a round table. So that's a little bit different. I think, Regina keeps talking about fun, and that's obviously part of my company name is Safety Fundamentals, because I like to see training always have a little bit of fun. And people sometimes think, oh, you can't have it's fun, can't be silly, but fun and silly are different things. Honestly, fun, you're having people more engaged and paying attention. So I think even now at this time when people are pretty stressed out, they don't know what's going on with their families or their jobs or the economy or anything. Even if you have them, for those 5 minutes, let them have a little bit of fun and relax a little bit. It's really going to, I think, make their day first off. And you're also going to get their attention, right? Like, you don't want them to zone out and think it's 5 more of training. I don't have time for this right now, especially, make it fun so they do pay attention. And then they actually will hopefully remember some more of the information that you're telling them.
Yeah, I think the overarching theme with a lot of these tips is the goal of retention, which is always our goal with training. And I think if you can make people laugh, that they may be more apt to remember something, or especially if they're coming into a class to learn about, or logging into a class, I guess, or watching a video to learn about coronavirus, like they're not expecting to laugh. And I think that can help them to just like jog that memory later on, that they remember the content as it was presented. And Tim, when we did that storytelling session, that was part of it, was like the emotion factor, that not just humor, but also maybe you're going low also with the emotions, and then ultimately sweeping it back up. So playing with those types of flows too can really help at these times.
Yeah, you used a term that I love. Got it canned already, but it's called sweep the emotion. And a lot of folks, I've seen a lot of training that I've audited before where people would come in and they'd show this high impact video that had a lot of moving parts. And a majority of what you saw there was really, so it's hard to explain, but it's just really high impact from it's got a lot of blood and guts. It's the stuff that people just won't normally want to see, but when you see that, it makes you kind of sit back for a minute and go, whoa, that's a little too much for me. But then if you sweep the emotion, you bring them back upbeat. So you never want to finish on a low note. You always want to finish on a high note, and laughter is a big deal. That's for the session that I do every single year. It's called the Humor and Safety. And I spend time saying that there are activities, even gamification. If you get them to laugh and you get them to smile, it always goes back to retention and engagement, which is extremely important, specifically in design, when you're thinking about how you're going to deliver those classes.
Yeah, and intensity is a word that I've been thinking of a lot lately too, that it just feels not only tense, but also just intense all the time. That it feels like every single day, it feels like you're dealing with an incident and then all the investigation that goes with an incident. And I'm doing a lot of like fact finding and research and putting things out there for people that you just get, it's very intense to be in this type of environment every single day. And I think that if we can somehow get away from or draw people away from that intensity, and maybe humor can help with that, or some other type of feeling, or maybe just an activity or just a different way of looking at something, I think can really help. And then again, when you can kind of put people in a different brain space, that can again foster that retention of the material, which is our goal every
Right.
time.
Well, look at the coronavirus, the briefings that you see from Governor Cuomo in New York, and then of course later in the afternoon you follow up with the president's briefing. It's funny to look at these things, but when Governor Cuomo 2 days ago said, "Let's go out there and kick coronavirus's ass," that to me was a standout moment, and everybody was like, they shoved their fist up in the air and they were like, "Yes, let's do this." And to me, from a safety perspective, coronavirus is a serious topic. It's gonna be one of the things of our lifetime that we have to continue talking about. And we weren't prepared, but now still looking at this situation, when he said that, it motivated people outside of that brain space of something so intense like this virus. And I think it's important. You're right. They need to smile.
Mm-hmm. Also, we can rally if we can all get together against a common thing. I think that helps people too, because we kind of have like this, especially as Americans, like a competitive type of spirit. And maybe that's part of what stuck with you too about
Yep,
that message.
I agree with that for sure.
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, we have a lot of our safety colleagues out there that they're having to do these things every day. And I feel like from what I see as I scroll through social media, it looks like a lot of intensity, a lot of emotions, a lot of sometimes it's like misinformation or half information, or just because of how fast things are changing, that the information is just changing, especially with let's just talk about it. Masks. um, do you wear a mask? Do you not wear a mask? What kind of mask do you wear? Is it okay to wear the mask that your grandma made for you? Things like that. So,
Could we get them to know the difference between a ventilator and a respirator first, though?
ooh, that too.
That
Yeah.
one's making me nuts. They're like, we need 2 million ventilators. I'm like, no, those aren't ventilators.
I think I'm muttering these things like under my breath to the news every night, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. I'll say it to my husband. I'm like, respirators, ventilators.
I do love that PPE is now an official term. I mean, everybody knows what it is. That's so awesome for our industry. It's no longer a black eye. Oh, PPE. Now it's like, no, that's life-saving stuff. That's awesome stuff. So I think it's really amazing that it's something that almost every American, every person in the world can speak to right now. And it's taken that safety perspective and really turned it to the positive side that maybe it didn't have before.
Do you
Is there
know
a
what the
downside to that though?
Sorry?
Tim.
I was just going to say, do you know what the acronym stands for? Because our governor in Arizona calls it personal professional equipment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I heard that one.
That's awesome.
That could be worse.
Oh no, it could be a lot worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff out there that could get wrong. Yeah.
I'm
No, I
actually,
did not catch that. That's awesome.
that's funny. I'm just actually waiting for the day when the news media will actually call a safety professional up and say, what are some of these things? I would actually like to petition some of the media saying you need to interview a safety professional, or even somebody that has an MPH, a master's in public health, because what we get a lot of is doctors dealing with specific issues, and public health is not one of those things that they have a discussion with, even though they're talking about it every single day.
That's a really good point. I guess I've done that on the local level. Like if I see my local news is covering, usually it's a construction incident that's happened, and they call a scissor lift a cherry picker, or some weird word. They call something a crane and it's not a crane. And so I honestly just tweet the media person and say, hey, local safety professional here. I can help you. Like if you just send me a picture, I can tell you what all these things are. So you sound smart on the news. And they've taken me up on it. So maybe that's just like a call to action for safety professionals. Just contact your local news and be that person. That's the resource.
I don't know if if you guys are familiar with HARO. Do you know HARO? It stands for Help a Reporter Out. If you subscribe to those things, they send out twice a day list of bullets of reporters looking for experts on different areas. And there's lots of COVID-19 stuff in there. So if anybody could help those reporters, that's a good way to actually connect them to a proper expert when they're looking for someone. And I'm sure ASSP is probably getting calls as well for people. And if you know anyone able to talk to the media on some of those issues, it might be a good idea to put them in touch with ASSP's public relations person, and then he can make the connection for you.
Really good idea. Yeah. I was going to say about the PPE thing, about people knowing what it is. We've got our hierarchy of controls. So do you think that there's kind of a negative side to people being so gung-ho about PPE that we have to also backtrack a little bit and educate on the other controls they could be using?
Yeah, same problem, bigger audience. Oh, well, let's put a face mask on, and that immunizes me. No, not so much. But yeah, that seems to be one of the issues. Is people want to cherry pick what they want to hear and what they want to learn, and I don't think that's that much different than what we experience when we're working with folks we're trying to protect. They'll pick up one thing or another thing, and I think that's one of the challenges that the world, the media, the medical professional, whoever you're listening to at the moment, I think that's what they're struggling with is, one person hears one little thing and that's what they latch onto. So, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, it depends on the individual, I suppose. But, I think that reflects more of what the challenges of learning are in general. And now everyone's in such an information overload, again, not so dissimilar to what we've been in the past in our workplaces, that, folks their brains are just automatically filtering out some of the stuff. And if it's the wrong stuff to filter out, that can be a real issue.
You think, Regina, about, we all get so much of this information and we're all trying to figure out what's real and what's not real. You scan through your social media feeds and, what jumps out at you are all the things with either videos or infographics, right? So even when we're trying to train our own people, it's really good to use those things. And I think safety professionals should keep that stuff in mind. Like a one-page infographic with the bare basics is going to go a lot further than if we try to give somebody 10 minutes of the same information in a little mini recording.
That is exactly it. And it's the 5 steps to hand washing. It's the top 3 things to know. People remember things that are chunked, that are put in some sort of memory-based form, a mnemonic, whether it's a song. I mean, that was like the big thing, right after the hand washing came out, as everybody was trying to come up with their favorite song to wash their hands to. I mean, and that's a great way to try to promote the transfer of knowledge, is to attach to something that they know. But yeah, you're exactly right. Keep the message really simple, get it down to a single page, a single 5-minute micro learn, something like that. And, we could really, really make an impact one little nugget at a time.
I think also it's pretty critical information, right? So you don't want to be throwing out all those giant scientific words, right, at people. So anyway, we can break it down and, think about the people who don't have great English skills, right? There's a large percentage of American workers who aren't super literate and really can't read above a 5th grade level. And then you have people who don't read English at all. So you're sending out information that they can't understand. It's not helping anyone. So in addition to the images, it's really just toning it way down and making it easy for everybody to comprehend.
That's a really good point, Linda. I feel like I haven't seen a lot of information out there in other languages on coronavirus.
It must be, right? Because it's in all the countries, pretty much, like it's all over. But I know I haven't either.
Okay. I know the ASSP Hispanic Safety Professional Common Interest Group, that they've put out some links to resources of things that are in Spanish. But other than that, I really haven't seen much of anything. And like Regina, like you said, there is a lot of stuff out there that's in infographic format. And sometimes lately when I'm posting things, I try to think of, okay, can people look at it on Instagram and is it appealing? Like even for a safety message. So, like bringing it to like trimming down the words, but trimming it down so that you don't even have to scroll one time on your cell phone to see the whole thing. It's not that attention spans are so bad, but it's just, you have to get the information out there quickly in a visual way.
Well, it's funny because I'll see some news articles that I'm reading, and they'll print the full scientific name of the virus, and I'm like, COVID would work. The
Right.
virus
Yeah,
would
that'll
actually
do.
work at this point, but it's like, why would you waste, a third of a line on the proper representation of the virus when we all know what it is right now? And that's an example of where we've really got to be ruthless and go, you know what, people know what we're talking about. We're all pretty darn focused on it. So we don't need to say things and to drag things out or whatever, and so it's interesting to me because it's like, there's not enough to try to absorb. And then you start throwing out tech and medical and chemical, and it's crazy.
Good point. So the time went by really fast. So I think there's probably at least one more thing that everybody maybe had in mind before we jumped on this podcast. And so I want to give a round the table moment for everyone to leave one last parting thought for the group, one last ruthless thought for the listeners.
Ruthless. I would say there's 4 things that I've been I just love this ruthless hashtag. Excuse me. I think there's 4 things that I've been working on with the local community here, and that's be diligent, be vigilant, be safe, but smile. And if you could do all 4 of those things for me, and this is just for now, because when we come out of this, we'll be able to come back to this and visit and say, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? Just like a good safety professional would. And then also something that I've learned in the last 35 minutes, just hashtag ruthless superhero.
Love it. For me, a lot of my work has always been born out of trying to amp up the humanity of the work that we do in the profession, but just as human beings in general. And for me, everything that's going on in the world right now, I see this as our opportunity as a world full of people to find those human connections, of course, at a distance. I was actually teaching a class right before Vegas closed down, right before everything kind of hit it. And I said, normally I'm all about hugging and everything like that. And this guy goes, texting hearts. And I said, that's it. We need to text more hearts. So right now, we'll have to text more hearts, and we just have to stay committed to each other as human beings, because that's always been the premise of the work that we've been doing in the profession. But now it's becoming even more evident as we're seeing how this impact is on every facet of our life, and on facets of our life that we may not have even thought about before because they weren't part of our personal life, but now we're seeing them in the media and things like that. And so, from issues of hunger and the financial ruin and things like that, this is a great time for us to be better humans.
Has to go to Linda.
Okay, I'm here. I'm still here. I think what I've personally tried to do is to look for the positive every day. There's so much negativity around, and besides turning off the news a lot more, looking for the positive. And I think we mentioned the attention that PPE is getting, but I think the attention that safety and health professionals are getting from their upper management and from corporations, it's a positive thing that, people are starting to realize what people do and the importance they have in the workplace. And I think for safety and health professionals who are worried, and I know many are in essential businesses, but some are worried about losing their jobs, it's a time to really look and see what you can do with that time. It's like we have time now to learn some new things and think what's important in the future. A lot of organizations are putting out their online training free. So there's a little bit of, say, nuggets, like good things that are out there if you just look hard enough and try not to watch all the horrible stories that were being flooded around us. But I think every day, just really try to think what's positive in our lives and in the world and our communities as a whole.
That was awesome. Everybody, I literally have nothing to add other than that this whole exercise here today really just reinforces some advice I've been giving to people, but haven't really thought about much for myself, which is just connection. That we have this concept right now of social distancing, and it kind of made people think of socially isolating, which isn't what we're supposed to be doing. It's physical distancing. So, I would love to be in the same room with all of you and be able to see you and interact. But this is what we have right now. So I think it's important for people to still maintain their social network and our social connections and reach out to people, because with your people that you work with in an office, usually you're missing those chances where we used to just walk by and say, what's up? And, what's that coffee today? So we need to figure out how we can take those moments with our connections. And so I'm just really happy and grateful that you all would get on this podcast with me today and talk about all this stuff. And I think some really helpful information has been shared. And when I do go back and record the intro, I will tell people to grab a pen and a notebook. This is not the kind of podcast you'd listen to while commuting, which a lot of people aren't doing that anyway.
Right.
So it works. So thanks again, all of you. This has been awesome. And speaking of texting hearts to people, I hope that people give us some hearts and likes and reviews and comments on this podcast and let us know what you think.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Abby.
The views expressed on this podcast are solely the opinions of the hosts and their guests, not necessarily their employer, organization, committee, or any other group or individual on this planet or any yet to be discovered containing intelligent life. The podcast is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. Nothing within this recording is intended to be used as legal guidance or representation of any entity. No portion of the podcast may be reproduced without the express written consent of the show's creator, Safety Justice League, LLC. But hey, ask us nicely. We'll probably share.